At UMC, access to your health care is only a call away. Dial 74-NURSE for free, instant medical advice from experienced and trusted UMC nurses, 24 hours a day. Learn more at umchealthsystem.com.
And welcome in everyone to RedRaiders.com. I'm Zach along with Krista Pirtle. It is time to look at some topics within Texas Tech football, the Big 12, and the NCAA as a whole. As we count down to kickoff, of course, Iowa State coming to Lubbock to face the Texas Tech Red Raiders. First up, Krista, let's look at some topics within Texas Tech football. And you look right now at the problem, if you want to call it a problem, that Cliff Kingsbury has. He has 3 quarterbacks that are seemingly ready to go. As far as we know, you could have a lot worse problems to deal with, like no quarterbacks. But right now, what do you see the potential as for Texas Tech with this quarterback derby they have still midway through the season?
I mean, I think it's still questionable. It depends on the communication that goes on with the quarterbacks and with the wide receivers. They have to hit them at just the right point. They need to know where they can catch the ball best. Like with Jace, throw it anywhere. With Jakeem, you need to lead him so he can still dance with a defender and beat him. If you throw it behind him, he doesn't have that chance. Eric Ward, Bradley Marquez does great on the fade route. You really need to know that, and I think that Cliff really needs to establish a quarterback going in because they're fixing to get into the meat of their season.
That's right.
And so with that, they're going to need somebody at the helm who has those leadership qualities, that has been there, that can do this and will continue to be constant throughout the rest of the season.
And I think most fans and a lot of media, you know what we're expecting here. We're expecting Michael Burr at some point to walk out and take that job back. I'm not convinced that's going to happen because I think Baker Mayfield was really starting to show some progression against Kansas last week. He's going to be tough to beat out when he's healthy because I think Cliff really likes that kid.
Absolutely, and Kingsbury's big thing is extending the play. And he said when it was just Brewer and Davis Webb that Brewer was great at extending it, and then when it got down to Baker Mayfield and Webb again, that Baker really extends the play. So I think that's really what Kingsbury is looking for. All of them, that is a big factor, especially with the lack of a running game that Tech has had so far. But they really need to grab a guy that's consistent and get him going.
Speaking of consistency, something that everyone has to be pretty darn pleased with at this point is the Texas Tech defense. My goodness, they just keep getting better and better. Now, granted, they've got a huge schedule coming up where they're going to face some much more talented offensive teams, but from a turnover standpoint, you've got to be happy with Tech's defense.
Texas Tech totaled 11 turnovers last season. They've already got that. So that is a great step of improvement. That was a focal point throughout fall camp that they needed to improve on the turnovers, and they have so far. It's going to be interesting. They haven't really played a tough offensive team. I thought that SMU would do something. They've tanked. I thought that TCU would really do something with Javon Boykin and the receivers and running backs they have. They've tanked too. So it's just, I can't wait to see what they do against Oklahoma, going on the road against West Virginia, even though they aren't huge, just to see what they do in a new environment.
Should be interesting, but right now I think they've got to be very pleased with their progression. And the biggest thing is they believe in themselves, which is something covering Texas Tech the last 6 years. There's some times when that has not been the case. They haven't had that confidence. And under Wallerstadt, he really instills that energy in that group. And man, you see a couple times against Kansas last week, they come off the field, their energy's higher, celebrating on the sideline even more so after making a huge play in the game and getting turnover.
Absolutely, and one thing is I think those guys have fully bought into the attack mindset, the aggressive mindset of Wallerstadt. When you see one guy tackle, he's not alone. There are other guys with him, and I think that hats to the ball mentality they've really bought into and have done really well with.
They like the word violent. That's a big word for Matt Wallerstadt, and I can appreciate that because football is a violent sport, and if that's the attitude it takes to continue having that success, then have at it. Krista, inside the Big 12 Conference, of course, we have said numerous times, we're just really not going to know until we get into the bloodletting known as the month of November, but we're starting to see some identities within the Big 12 Conference. Is there a clearer picture at this point of who might come out in this race?
It's still, you just have no idea. Like, everyone is starting to say Baylor, Baylor, Baylor because 70 points, what is happening? Those starters haven't played a full game yet. Their stats are leading the Big 12. But like we've talked about, when those starters have to go 4 quarters, can they handle it? The rest of the conference, the Big 12 is usually known for being a very offensive league, but this year the offenses have really staggered in their productivity so far.
it's starting to look like it's really going to come down to, you're looking at Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Texas Tech. They're really starting to slide themselves up. Now, Texas is still in there. I think that will come to an end Saturday against Oklahoma. They're going to get drilled. Just my personal thoughts. So those four are really going to move forward. But, before anyone gets real up on Baylor or frightened about Baylor, when you talk about them, something you always got to remember in terms of perspective with college football is look at the Oregon Ducks every year. Who's going to beat Oregon? Their high-powered giant offense. Well, someone like Stanford or someone like that pops Oregon eventually. They're not invincible. They're going to play better teams eventually, and they're going to get beat. I still think you could see a scenario where a team with 1 or even 2 losses wins the Big 12 Conference.
Absolutely. It's not going to take being undefeated to win this conference just the way it's going. But I do think that as the season progresses, well, until now, basically, Oklahoma has won games defensively. Their defense has stood out. Texas Tech, defense. Oklahoma State, their defense has stepped up its game since years past, and Baylor really hasn't needed its defense after scoring 28 points in the first quarter. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the defenses hold out throughout this really tough conference slate.
I think what we're essentially waiting to see is which team is going to be as close to possible as being complete on both sides of the football, not just having a strength one way or the other. That's really going to be the key.
Absolutely, and we'll have to wait to find out.
And in terms of the BCS, Krista, Oklahoma right now, they're probably going to be the highest ranked team in those initial BCS standings, which mean nothing at this point. There's still too much football left to play. But this is the last year that we're going to deal with said BCS standings. And right now, this week in college football, a lot of attention to the Playoff Selection Committee, which is forming, and the names are starting to leak out. We're going to have that membership list here very shortly. Of course, next year they'll be tasked with picking out the 4 teams that will make up the playoff in college football. And this week, there's been a lot of controversy. Each time one of these names comes out, people either throw a fit or they celebrate, and there's been a lot of throwing a fit this week on a couple subject matters.
Absolutely. People are not happy that Condoleezza Rice has been named to the committee. A lot of people saying, like David Pollock, I think it was on Game Day, he said that women shouldn't be on the committee because they haven't played football. Well, right now we're using computers for the BCS, and have they played football? No. The Big East commissioner, who is named, didn't play football. He's a dude. Has anyone complained about that? No. And also I think what's funny with Condoleezza Rice is that football is seen as kind of like a battle. You're going to war with your teammates. Funny, she was the Secretary of State. I think when analyzing how teams play, because that's going to be a big part in this playoff selection committee, analyzing that, seeing tactics, she will have a good eye as to what goes on.
Right now, that's the thing about it. You bring up a good point. Computers are choosing some of our playoff teams right now. The people who built those computers probably grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. If you hit them in the head with a football, they wouldn't know what it was. So right now, if people want to attack Condoleezza Rice for her lack of involvement with football, that's fine and that's fair. The gender issue is absolutely unacceptable. That is ridiculous. I hope that we have grown as a society enough to start dropping that out. And the people who bring that up, quite frankly, just stop paying attention to them. Stop putting their quotes in the public. Do not trust their opinion, because if they're at that point in their life where they think just because of someone's gender, they can't make a judgment call on something as simple as choosing 4 teams for a playoff, that's ridiculous. Grow up, or, get out of society. Stop putting yourself upon the public and saying those things, because quite frankly, like you said, Condoleezza Rice is a brilliant individual. Any of those high government officials who work in those jobs where they, you go and you negotiate with foreign heads of states, you're telling me those people cannot go, say, well, I think these 4 teams are the best? Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I pretty much think you hit the nail on the head right there, so I will not add on to that.
Yeah, because as I said, I'm fine with Condoleezza Rice, because quite frankly, here's going to be the deal. When the list comes out, someone's going to have a problem with everybody, and when they pick the 4 teams, they'll start microanalyzing, going, well, old Tom Osborne, man, he's pro, Nebraska, or he's pro Big Ten, because everything's going to come out of the woodwork. But to get all bent out of shape because they put Condoleezza Rice on there right now, there are worse problems in the world to worry about than putting a Ivy League educated woman like Condoleezza Rice on a football playoff committee.
Also, and we've seen things with concussion and head injuries with men who've played this sport. So, hey, her brain could be perfectly fine to handle this.
Exactly. Until something goes terribly wrong, why assume something is going to go wrong? It's going to be a multi-member crew. It's not like one individual is going to ransack the entire college football selection process. But like we said, until someday when there is, even if we move to a 16-team playoff, which everyone would love to see, that's like the lower divisions, what's people going to debate about? oh, well, who got in as the 15th and 16th seeded team in this? There's always going to be a pain in the butt. The key thing is, at least we're getting a more pure system to where at least 4 teams have a chance to play it on the field to decide who is the national champion of college football.
Yes, it will be interesting. I'm excited to see how things work out, kind of analyze how things go behind the scenes, and I think that it will be a good step for college football next season.
Man, we got off on a serious tangent right there, Krista. We'll get back to something a little bit lighter, but not too much lighter, and that's Texas Tech and Iowa State on Saturday, of course. We have a ton of coverage of that game over at Lubbock Online and RedRaiders.com. Of course, Don versus Twitter. People love listening to Don answer Twitter questions. We've got the UMC Health System AJ Media pregame show up as well. And, of course, we have our game day coming out. You can get on the app, on the old App Store, right? You see it on the iPad.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't want the print edition, but if not, go get the print edition. Of course, you can go to RedRaiders.com and LubbockOnline.com for full coverage of Texas Tech versus Iowa State. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of Topics with Krista Pirtle. I'm Zach Long. We'll see you next time.